Good morning, good afternoon, welcome.
And good night.
Hey, Margaret, have you been running from anything recently?
Just you, Preston.
Oh, anything else or
um,
oh, I
I don't think so.
I run.
Walking,
I run a
walking
lot
quickly,
actually for exercise. I
briskly.
enjoy that, but not
Okay.
like in the social context that you're describing.
Not in the
Like when
social
you
con.
don't
You like
like when
running?
you don't respond to my texts or
Well,
something.
we're working on it.
Yeah. So here's my question to you. What is the farthest you've ever ran?
I think 14 miles.
It's a long time. Tell me about that.
I did cross country in high school, and then my family did like worse than turkey trot. We half of us did half marathon, a few half marathons together when I was like high school, college.
So the half marathon's like 13 and
0.1, yeah.
change.
But I think a couple
So
of my training
did you
ones
just
were a
get
little
lost
longer.
along the
No, your training
route
ones are a
and then
little longer. Or mine were.
okay.
I was listening to the Hunger Games at the time. No, yes. And
Gotcha.
I wanted to finish the chapter
You were
for one of my training
hungry
runs. I was hungry for a
14
victory.
miles.
Yeah. Not very fast, though. Definitely not fast. Definitely like a 9-minute,
That's
9.5
still
minute
good. And
mile.
I don't think speed matters. You know, it's
Well,
a half marathon, not a sprint, right? As the saying goes.
as famously as the saying goes. What's the longest you've ever run so far, Preston?
So I want to say it's 13 miles actually.
Hell yeah.
Which is wild. It's less than Margaret. It was in college. I was an 800 meter runner. So like you're training for the half mile. Most of my runs were like 5 or 6 miles because I do a lot more like repeat training, like we do sprints and things like that with like a little bit of aerobic base. But I was trying to do a 9-mile long run when I was on vacation in Germany. Yeah, I did get lost because all the sign I was like running through this park in Berlin and all the signs were in German.
Well,
and I was like, okay, left turn, right turn, right turn, left turn, right turn, left turn, left turn, right turn. I was like, oh no, this is like turning into the labyrinth like really fast.
Did you not have your phone?
And then I was like, oh, I'll just read the signs on the way back. And then it's like Zuken Heivenschleislin or like Gesunken Dorken. And I was like, oh, none of this is familiar.
Yeah.
Like turned into a fever dream. And I was like, do any of these structures look the same? Like,
Did you
no,
not
it's
have
all
your phone?
It's all just no, I didn't have my phone because
why would you do that?
Because it was like 2017. I never really ran with my phone.
Oh, to be a man. Oh, to be a man.
I don't know. I like
I'm running in a new foreign city phoneless, just vibes only.
And it wasn't even a GPS watch. It was just like a dumb
it was a calculator
like timer watch. Yeah, it was like those Timexes.
Like this
I just
tells
left.
me that
I left the hotel and I was like, I'll figure it out. But it was fun because by the time I hit like mile 11 and realized like I was just gonna be lost and running through this city, I hit like a fourth wind. Like, you know how you like a second wind and a third wind? Like I didn't even know this like last gear existed.
Yeah.
It almost like felt like my body found a new fuel source.
It was like mile 11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's like a new level that gets unlocked at 16 or 17.
Yeah. I feel
20.
like my parents and my sister shout out to my family, ran the Chicago Marathon each a few times. And I just remember like watching them go out to like go train on training runs on like Saturdays and being like, I'll see you guys in 3 hours. Like, I'll see you guys later.
Yeah, it's a long time.
And you are.
I'm training for a marathon.
There it is.
And it totally under peer pressure, like not of any desire of my own. My friend just texted me. He was like, come on, man, train for the LA Marathon.
Oh, no.
I know he's like, don't be a loser. And I was like,
yeah, that's a nicer word than I was going to say.
I was like, okay, I guess I'm training for it now. And like, I wanted some structure and it's nice to do it.
Yeah.
It was funny to bring that up in therapy. I was like, I'm training for a marathon. And my therapist was like, ah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Say more.
She's like, do you think this is going to cure you? And I was like, no, I just want structure for my exercise. And she was like, thank God.
You're like, I'm going to win it, actually.
She was like, woo. She was like, because normally when people say they're going to train a marathon, they really they're looking for that final piece of achievement to prove to themselves they can do something.
Well, I feel like I was listening to a podcast the other day that was about someone who works in the space of like post-professional athletes' mental health. So like people who finish after like college or like, you know, Division 1 or 2 or 3 sports, or after they're in like professional leagues, and the transition from being like in an all-consuming sport to then being like, what the hell? Where is the structure? Like, what's going on? I wonder what it's like for you, like in working out and stuff, or like running. Like, do you find it, especially since your background was running,
Mhm.
like, is it easy for you to stay like, I'm doing this for fun and not get competitive with yourself? Or is it like hard to not have that, like, I'm performance mode with exercise?
It's I haven't been able to form the, I guess, hygiene aspect or like the hygiene mentality around exercise yet.
Hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
for me, it still has to be driven towards performance.
Mm.
And when I want to do it just to be healthy or something, I find that I just kind of stop doing it, which is really
Hmm.
interesting. And I
Yeah.
tried to do that with lifting for a while, but it only worked when I had a goal. Like I was trying to improve my bench max to a certain point or my deadlift, or I wanted to like reach a certain mass. And then I kind of realized that with lifting, I was like, I'm stuck on this like performance track. So either I go into bodybuilding and I'll probably develop an eating disorder, or I'll
Mm.
go into powerlifting and like blow out a lumbar disc or something.
Mm.
So, I mean, like, obviously, those can be like great sports that anyone can pursue. I just don't think they were like the best for me
Mm-hmm.
and like
Mm-hmm.
are conducive to my training load as someone who's just kind of ran their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got back into running, I think I just wanted to have a race or something at the end of it to be
Mm-hmm.
like working towards.
Yeah.
So I wonder if like one day I'll get to the point where I can just treat running like brushing my teeth, like, oh, it's just
Yeah.
something I'll do.
Yeah.
But right now, I think I just dislike it too much that unless there's like something I'm working towards, I can't overcome that,
Well, I
which is
wonder how
interesting.
much the like dislike has to do with the fact, has to do actually with some of that, that it like, there's a lot of reps of it being for a goal or for a purpose and pressured and then rewarded for that. But therefore, also the actual exercise itself probably is already always kind of, maybe not obviously not all the time tough in terms of like effective training, but like has a lot of moments in it that are like excruciatingly painful versus like, oh, I'm just going on like a 20-minute jog where my heart rate just gets into like, the 130s or something.
Yeah, there's
I'm
some
just
beauty
chilling.
in a nice jog through the park.
Yeah.
I think the analogy I would use is like eating pancakes.
Hmm.
So imagine if you just like enjoyed pancakes at breakfast
Hmm.
sometimes, but then someone was like, "Hey, Margaret, you're pretty good at eating pancakes. Why don't you join our
That
pancake
has
eating
been said.
team?"
That has been.
Yeah. And then now all of a sudden you're like staying up late at night shoving down pancakes, and then
Yeah.
you like eat as many pancakes as you can at 2 in the afternoon after school, and you're vomiting them up, and they're like, no, eat more pancakes, Margaret, eat more pancakes. And they're like, Margaret, some other girls, they're actually eating 2 more pancakes than you at practice
Hmm.
each day. So if you don't get these pancakes down,
You suck and you're a
like
bad
you're not
person.
going to be able to stay on the pancake eating team. You understand? You
It's
understand
high
what I'm
pressure.
saying?
It's high
And then
pressure.
and then now you're cutting out
See what I'm
breakfast because you're
saying?
trying to fit more pancakes into your diet, and then you're freaking
All right.
puking. You're
Trigger
using
warning.
laxatives
Yeah, stop.
just so you can get
Stop.
more
Stop.
pancakes.
Stop.
And then you finally get out of college and you show up to brunch one day and everyone's like, you know what? Let's order some pancakes. And you're like, oh,
You're having
I
more
used to eat
flashbacks.
pancakes competitively. I'd rather not. And they're like, no, just have one just for the joy of it. And you kind of
Yeah.
like look at this pancake on your plate and you're like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of how I feel about running.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to that. I think it's something I can't relate to necessarily. In some ways, as I've like gotten older, I've been more grateful that exercise was not rewarded in any way for me simply because I wasn't good. I'm not an athletic person. And so it was like, well, I'm definitely not going to look cool doing this.
Yeah.
But it becomes a different question of how do you fit it back into your identity. Um, I feel like this I was about to say cold open, this icebreaker. Uh, I feel like we're accidentally touching on a lot of the things we're going to talk about
Hmm.
content wise for this episode.
Yeah. So it's really interesting how running and exercise are folded into our identities and also like
Hmm.
our concept of health and how we promote ourselves as healthy individuals.
Hmm.
So I'm really excited about this episode overall. And when we come back from this break, we'll be talking about how running was incorporated into kind of health and fitness culture because it wasn't always like that.
Right.
And then this kind of growing body of research on all of the ways that running protects us from mental
Hmm.
health disabilities
Hmm.
and also maybe even treat the ones that we have currently. And then we'll start to get into, is running the best way to exercise? Are there other options? And like, are they all the same, or is there one that comes out on top? And
Right.
what does it even, how do we even measure what makes one better than the other?
Right. And is there different indications we can think about in some way, thinking about like how, like not all, but like SSRIs, they're all good, but you choose different ones for different folks based on a number of things. But based on that, like, same kind of idea of what we're trying to do, but maybe this person has this response to this kind of And I feel like exercise is
Yeah, in
thinking
medicine,
about
we
it that
love
way.
a silver bullet in theory, but it's never one size fits all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we can find out like whose slipper is their own
I
Cinderella
love the
shoe.
smell wherever.
When do you think running became popular as a sport?
I mean, you and I both know that we both have a hyperfixation on exercise and mental health and then falling down deep rabbit holes. I want to say it was in the book Spark by Dr. John Ratty that talks about mental health and exercise. Because there was a big thing with like the Boston Marathon, the 1970s.
Yeah, so 1970s is when we started to incorporate it as a hobby.
Okay.
If you want to get technical, going back to running as a sport was the Olympics. So the Greeks included running, distance running, short distances, jumping, things like any kind of athletic competition in the 600s BC. And actually, up until about the 5th century, running was popular in some Arabic countries in the context of pilgrimages and traveling long distances. So it's kind of seen with this positive air. And then from basically the 5th century to like the 18th century, running lost a lot of its prestige and was kind of seen as a dumb thing.
No one
a lot
ran
of people tried to avoid it. Yeah, they're like, running is for losers. I want to be carried around or like ride a horse or something. I was in the museum the other day and I was like looking at the different ways that they would transport like the royalties of old cultures, and so many of it was just like it was like a stretcher or like a little house. Like people would just carry, like be carried on the backs of servants and then walk through like riverbeds and jungles and everything like that. But anything but running. So the first big annual race was the Boston Marathon, actually.
Hell yeah.
And do you know what year it took place?
1974?
Earlier.
71.
Much earlier. 1897.
Oh, was that early?
Yes.
Oh, so I was thinking when it became popularized. Okay.
So at the turn of the century, so the oldest global marathon is the Boston Marathon, and it started right before the 20th century started.
Got it.
And then running up until about the 50s or the 60s was solely like a collegiate sport. And it was kind of in this like, wasn't really accessible to the average person. But around the early 60s, this one guy decided to write a book called Jogging when he was he was so inspired by the New Zealand Aussie run club that he said, you know what, this could be something for the average person. Yeah, it was like the first run club influencing. Do you want to guess who that guy was?
No, I don't know.
Okay. It was Bill Bowerman, who is the co-founder of Nike. So he was working as the assistant coach at the University of Oregon at the time. And he was working with his athletes. And he was doing a lot of stuff in the competitive running scene. And then he goes to New Zealand and kind of engages with these run clubs that they have there and goes, wow, like this can be something that everyone can do at every level. So he writes the book Jogging, and things start to be kind of popularized around running. And then the 70s is when things really take off. So that's what you mentioned, which from recent memory, what you know is what makes sense to us. So I picture like Forrest Gump just running for no particular reason. You know, like I just kept running. And so things like Steve Prefontaine started to popularize it. And then I think in the early 70s, we won our first marathon, like an American one of a big international marathon. It was Frank Shorter.
Okay.
So that started to bring like more attention to the stage. And then in the early 80s, they started to incorporate women's track and field in NCAA, which is crazy how recent that is. 1982.
Women hadn't run until 1982.
Yeah. So women before that, they were just speed walking, I
Yeah, you
guess.
guys have read Pride and Prejudice. You know that.
And
So post Title IX, basically.
yeah, so it went from being this kind of like nerdy thing or like a sport for elite athletes or collegiate athletes to now something that kind of like just people did.
Yeah, sporty
And
folks.
now looking at it today, run clubs are in a lot of ways a good source of community. So I saw an article the other day that was saying that run clubs are the millennial versions of churches. So where before in like the 80s and 90s, a lot of people would use church as their consistent form of community. And while those still exist, a lot of the like more agnostic or atheistic populations don't necessarily have that, but they can congregate at their run club every Saturday morning. So it's like a form of exercise and community for them.
Yeah. The kind of question of where's like the locus of connection and meaning.
Yeah, as it's through this, the conduit is exercise. And now, like looking at the population today, 24% of people say they've used running as some form of a hobby or kind of exercise. And there is a discrepancy between men and women, actually. So women take up the majority of road races. There's actually 60% women in road races now. On the converse, there are only 23% of trail runners. So men are more likely to take to the trails, I guess.
I wonder what that has to do with safety.
I think it probably has to do with safety too.
But I think there's also more of a like, we're gonna run a 5K, like all the girls, we're gonna do this. Like,
yeah,
I think guys could do that, but I feel like I've just like anecdotally had friends like when like the color run was a thing. I don't know, it probably still is. Sorry, color run. Like being like, oh, we're gonna go do this like themed 5K, or we're gonna like go to Nashville and do like one of the like rock and roll half marathons or something.
We've made running, or especially like these 5K races, like a thing to do. It's something to do on the weekend, and like I mentioned earlier, it's like a way to engage with the community.
Yeah. It's an interesting way though, because I think both you and I know this from our own backgrounds with running, at different levels of teams. Like I did cross country and track in high school, badly again. But like, while it is a really interesting sort of team, it also is a lot of like internal competition, like try and push yourself as hard as you can. I don't know, that's completely true with like road races and stuff, but it's interesting that it's like a community thing and not a team, but it's not a team sport. It's a very individual sport.
Yeah, that's a hill I'll die on, that it's still an individual sport. I think for something to be a team sport, it has to incorporate teamwork.
Yeah.
And while you are encouraging each other, like true teamwork is like
depending
collaboration. Yeah.
Which that also makes people more like, there's something sort of interesting about like, everyone talks about like the loneliness epidemic or not having third spaces. In a lot of ways, it's like this connection's great. It's similar in like group fitness classes, right? Like you're together, but you're not dependent on each other.
And I think it can be a double-edged sword. So some, like I was on a soccer team for a lot of my youth, and there was a lot of
my younger years.
in my younger years, there's a lot of bonding that happens when you're on a team because you have to work together and you're dependent on each other. But if someone is a weak link, they can become ostracized because of their lack of skill.
Yes.
And the social hierarchy is often built off of like who is best on the team. And that didn't really exist in track in the same way. I became friends with, everyone was kind of friends with everyone because our team was based on mutual encouragement, but not this like interdependence on skill.
Yeah.
So I had a friend who, the same thing happened with her with volleyball. She said, I tried to do volleyball, but there wasn't space for you to be not good and also accepted as a friend on the team.
That was also me.
Yeah, that sucks. But on cross country, everyone, because it's an individual sport, everyone can do their own thing, and then you can be socially accepted. So while you don't have that like tight knit, like we're a team community, the same way like volleyball has, no one's getting excluded either.
Right.
So
no, I totally agree.
I think there's like, as far as like creating accepting open spaces, running is perfect for that, and that is an extension of its nature as a individual sport. Like, it's not a bug, it's a feature, I guess.
And there's like there's one of the run clubs. So one of my goals, maybe we'll do who knows when this will be released, but like one of my goals for 2025 is to actually go to the November Project chapter that's in Boston. Specifically, they do a stair run at like 5:30 and 6:30 at like the Harvard football stadium. And like that's like one of their signature weekly workouts. It's like a huge thing in Boston in the running world. And I've wanted to go for a couple of years. I was like, no, I need to like train more and do more. So my goal is to like run enough and do enough. I now live in a place that has like my gym has a Stairmaster or whatever. So I was like, okay, we're gonna get enough lung capacity. But like the team, the point of that being like the team, while someone can have less skill and it's okay, there's still this sacrificial part of like, well, my friend said they're gonna be there at 6:30. I maybe I would not go if this was just me in the stairs.
The
But
mutual accountability still
yeah,
exists.
yeah, which sounds like
absolutely.
is probably true. And are you in a run club?
I mean, not I show up, but like not officially. No one's like, "Where's Preston?" If
You're
I don't
run club
come.
adjacent.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I see all the memes that run clubs are like these sexual water holes for millennials now, which I don't think that, like, not for me at least. I mean, like I show up and I just see like all the grandmas with their weights and like the 50-year-old dudes, and then we have this guy named Mo who just like he just like prattles on for like 15 minutes, and we take a picture and we go run.
That's about right.
And
That's
then I
about
go on
right.
TikTok and everyone's like, "Oh my god, these run clubs are so
Yeah, the New
horny."
York
And I'm
run
like,
clubs are like the New York run clubs are crazy.
Not here.
Yeah,
so
I feel like yours sounds more like what cross country felt like, even though we were all young at that point. It was like there's some interesting personalities afloat, but we're here, we're sweaty, we're gonna take a weird kind of cringy picture as a group photo, and then we're gonna go. Maybe we'll get ice cream after.
I know. Well, I know I'm gonna get those Mott's fruit snacks after, and some
Hell yeah.
some granola and their Gatorade. Like they have supply. All that stuff is awesome.
Yeah.
So outside of the social benefits of running, it turns out there's some physical benefits too, and we can go into all the cardiovascular benefits and the way cardiologists recommend exercise, but we're psychiatrists, so we're going to stick to the neuroscience as best we can. So there's a couple ways that we think about how running can benefit our mental health. And one of those that we're going to focus on today is through the lens of neuroplasticity and a couple different biomarkers that come out of running. So the proposed mechanism that we get benefit from running is through metabolizing different products. So as you know, we use sugar for energy, right? So you have a single molecule of glucose and you break it down and you oxidize it, and then that gives you ATP. That's where you get all your energy from. So in order to kind of handle energy for long periods of time, we stack glucose together in these chain links and put them in our muscles, and it's called glycogen. And so we break down glycogen while we're running. But then when we run out of glycogen, we have to use other sources of fuel. So it turns out when you can't just readily use sugar, you have to kind of convert fat directly. And so when you convert fat, you create these ketone bodies. So
keto diet.
Exactly. Yeah. So it turns out that even just running for like 45 minutes can be enough to induce catabolism of fats and dependence on ketone bodies for energy, because you can only use glycogen for so long and you actually start pulling from both sources. So your body's like, okay, I have freestanding sugar hanging out, I have glycogen I can use, and I have fat I can use. Let me get through as much of this as possible. And the engine's going to be pulling from different sources as you go through. The thought process is that once we start using those ketone bodies, there's several, like 4 or 5 different ones. There's like acetoacetate and like acetyl ketones. And then there's beta hydroxybutyrate is a famous one that's constantly studied. So beta hydroxybutyrate gives us a lot of energy, but it also crosses the blood-brain barrier and can actually fuel our brain. And so this is where a lot of people think that the keto diet has all these benefits, because if I never eat sugar, basically, if I never eat a carb, my body has to use fat. And if it has to use fat to power itself, it has to use these ketone bodies. So that's kind of the thought process behind the keto diet.
Which I will say, no shit, there are definitely clinical indications and personal preferences for the keto diet that make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. And especially for people who have metabolic dysfunction and they like can't break down fructose or glucose in the same way.
Yeah.
It can be life-saving for them to use the keto diet. So I don't mean to come across tongue in cheek when I'm talking about the keto diet, because there are some people that treat it like the end all be all, when for the purposes that we're serving, sometimes like, well, if you really just wanted to get access to beta hydroxybutyrate, you could just go run 5 miles.
Right.
So Now, beta hydroxybutyrate enters your brain. What does it do? Turns out it induces your brain to grow a lot of good proteins for it. So there's the region of the brain that we're going to talk about right now is the hippocampus. So what do you recall the hippocampus does?
Memory storage.
Yeah, exactly.
Short and long term? Question mark.
Yeah. And then there's a bunch of different ways that you can remember stuff, right? So you can remember language of things, you can remember numbers, you can remember spatially where things sit, and a lot of that hangs out in your hippocampus. And so for anyone who's kind of trying to picture where this is in your brain, think about the hippocampus being on like the bottom inner part of your brain. So we would say that that's like the inferior medial part of your brain using medical terminology. So I kind of picture the temporal lobes like my Princess Leia buns, kind of sitting under the brain. It's like the inside part of those guys.
If my understanding, and this could be wrong, is that the hippocampal area you're going to talk about, as well as there's a temporal mesial part that is implied in like the neuroplasticity, neurogenesis that has made this maybe what you're going to be talking about, but that there's a few distinct regions that we think are particularly plastic in adults and mediated by exercise.
So the dentate gyrus is one.
Yeah.
And that's just that innermost cleft.
Got it.
So to kind of take a pause here, the hippocampus is something that we care a lot about because we study this in many different diseases. And it's easy to detect changes in the sides of the hippocampus when we're measuring with something like fMRI or MRI, though these changes are probably happening everywhere else in the brain. So it turns out that across the board, whether you're looking at Alzheimer's, depression, polytrauma, PTSD, we observe decrease in the size of the hippocampus and decrease in activity in the hippocampus under fMRI. So we don't exactly know the mechanism of depression, but we know the damage it leaves, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We know sort of correlated
all we can do is
changes on
correlate.
image or some sort of like prospective sort of labs and things that we're like, this is happening and how, why, what? Question mark.
Yeah. And so there's a couple of proposed hypotheses, and one of them is that there's high levels of cortisol when you're constantly stressed and you're depressed and you're anxious.
That's
and
what the girls on TikTok are talking about. Just kidding.
Yeah.
That's not what they're talking about. It is and is not what they're talking about.
So those chronic high levels of cortisol may be causing hippocampal shrinking, or it may be really suppressing the normal, healthy pro-growth factors that will be kind of maintaining the plasticity of the hippocampus. And then over time, it kind of steals out, I guess. So let's say we introduce exercise and we get these ketone bodies, beta hydroxybutyrate comes in. It turns out that it actually goes into our neuronal cells and it helps transcribe for certain proteins. And one of those is called BDNF. It's
Hell yeah.
brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is something that everyone gets excited about.
My number one girl.
Yeah. So BDNF is cool because it promotes plasticity and it
Not
helps
to be
your
confused
brain
with
BDSM.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Well, BDSM also uses plastic things, or I guess latex.
Commonly we need to do an icebreaker sometimes where it's like the most like embarrassing, confused abbreviation or pronunciation you did of a medical word during training or like during med school.
Yeah. The classic one's always like pussy. Like the wound was pussy. And you're like, did you just write pussy?
You're like, what is this? I knew someone who didn't realize because they just like had only ever read the word how to pronounce edema. And so they were on rounds as like an intern and they said there was someone who was constipated and they were like, or no, sorry. There was someone, I just ruined my joke. There was someone who was like, had swelling in their lower legs. So they had edema. And he pronounced it like edema.
Nice.
And they were like, I'm sorry. What did you do to the patient? You intern? Like, he was like, they have
for free.
edema.
Yeah. I just took care of it this morning.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. That was offside tangent.
Yeah. So, Not to
You
be
were
confused
saying
with
BDNF.
BDSM. BDNF, it does a lot of great things, or we think it does.
Mhm.
What we should say now to kind of temper ourselves is great things happen when BDNF levels are high.
Yeah. It's like a party.
To
It's
what
like, it's
extent we
there.
know
We're
for
like, this is
sure
gonna be
it's
a
doing
good
it.
party.
It's
How
either
is it
driving it
happening?
or whenever it shows up, it has a friend that
Yeah.
also helps out.
Yeah.
But we know that's a kind of a marker when there is induced neuroplasticity. So BDNF can help promote new neuronal connections, and it also actually has measurable effects on things like memory. So they've done studies where they will have mice run on treadmills long enough to induce beta hydroxybutyrate, and then they will actually improve their spatial memory of things like mazes. We also can see like people or in mouse models, they'll like literally regrow some of the mass of their hippocampus in response to things like BDNF. So we can notice like the size of these neuronal tissues changing in response to this molecule.
Yeah.
BDNF
really
is also can be induced by like some of the other interventions that we give. So ketamine, for example, can induce brain-derived neurotropic factor. And there's a couple SSRIs that do it too. Famously, sertraline and fluoxetine also have been shown to do that.
ECT.
Yep, ECT as
or
well.
electroconvulsive.
So I have some attendings that will prescribe sertraline to patients with dementia just solely on the basis that it will theoretically increase BDNF and maybe theoretically help with neuroplasticity.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting.
So the question though is, when you're exercising, do you have to get that beta hydroxybutyrate to get that increase in BDNF?
Yeah.
And
what are your thoughts?
That's kind of where we're not sure, right?
Yeah.
Because when we look at the clinical data, we see that people improve their scores on anxiety and depression when they both lift and when they run.
Yes.
But it's unclear if molecularly we have those like same effects and the same neuroplasticity. So people subjectively report feeling better, but it's unclear to what extent the exercise is affecting that, if that makes sense.
Right.
Because there's things that make us feel better subjectively, like having community and like having structure and like having a place to go consistently.
Possibly being like out in nature or having like a different view, or like we think about like the behavioral activation therapy approach, which is in a paper that I read preparing for this episode on like an integrated review from I think 2021 on exercise for mental health, and talks about similarly like how do these studies, especially in the human studies, like rate controls and kind of take out like building relationships or getting outside of like your house, doing these other things that aren't necessarily physiologically the exercise per se, and how much of the effect is mediated by these things, which some studies do control really well for it.
Yeah. So now kind of looking at a lifetime of running, why do we care about BDNF? I know we're talking about its effects for things like depression, anxiety, and PTSD, but even in aging, there's some thought that BDNF, or at least is mechanistically related to some of about 4 of the major aspects of aging. So we all know telomere shortening is like one hypothesis that actually can prolong like telomere resilience. It also reduces oxidative stress. It can have oxidative stress.
Oxidative stress.
It reduces
It's mean, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. And it has anti-inflammatory properties.
Yeah.
And it can prevent DNA damage.
Yeah. I feel like there's the question of long-term running or long-term, conditioning aerobic exercise versus like interventions for mental health. But there's like the protective part of it versus also like interventions that study people who actively like have a dementia or have like Parkinson's, and how maybe not running, but like how these different types of conditioning activities can be preventative and then also palliative in older populations, even who aren't moving before a study.
Yeah. Like it's almost like its own treatment for them.
Yeah.
And I guess this part is just purely anecdotal, but one thing I've noticed whenever I have an older patient who's like just an absolute rock star and they're like consistently taking care of themselves or knocking out all of their IADLs and they're like 86, I don't know if like what the unifying factor is, but I've noticed they always exercise. I'm trying to think of like one older patient I've had that like that was crushing it that didn't exercise. Like I've had some that smoke, to be honest, and I'm like, dang, you smoke? And they're like, yeah, but I still run like 3 times a week. I'm like, oh wow, like dang. So it's just something like I've kind of just been picking up implicitly. Like I've noticed like among a lot of the patients that have great longevity, it's like exercise might not be the secret, but all of them still exercise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's like what makes a meaningful life and like how all these other factors that we talk about that impact someone's psychological and mental health, which is we try to separate these out on these studies, but a lot of people struggle with chronic pain and immobility as they get older for a number of reasons. And
Mhm.
what is the number one intervention for reducing pain, at least pain perception and overall dysfunction is graded exercise, right? And so I do wonder with these kinds of things also that like how much is it that exercise does mediate these other things that are obstacles to people having a life that they consider meaningful at different stages?
Mhm.
And then that makes their mental health better. But also, I think there's physiologic parts as well that probably are the impact too.
Yeah, and it's probably a combination of both. Where this is one of the situations where our hands are tied again with correlation. So
Yeah.
we don't know if exercise is the reason, but where exercise is, meaningful life and
Mm-hmm.
longevity
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah.
So if we want to look at the numbers now specifically in
Yeah.
a meta-analysis of 58 studies, they looked
Mm.
at people that did any form of aerobic exercise,
Mm-hmm.
and they found the lifetime risk of dementia was decreased by about 15 to 20%,
Huh.
which is pretty
Yeah.
significant.
Yeah.
And then actually for running specifically, they controlled for the distance that they would go. And so in patients that or in subjects that ran consistently more than 15 miles a week. So instead of just any amount of exercise, this is extended periods of aerobic endurance training. The risk of dementia was reduced by 40%.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
almost twice as much as the original group.
Well, I wonder too with like a dementia type perspective, like how common is vascular dementia? Um, and how much does running? I know we are not cardiologists. If there's cardiologists listening to this,
Hmm.
sorry, but we may butcher this. We'll try not, and we'll try to stay out of your lane. But thinking about even people who don't have a diagnosis of like vascular dementia, but how we like, there'll be like normal changes of aging, right? Present whenever we get an
Yeah.
MRI read, if there's that. And I want like running, obviously, cardiovascular, long distance exercise, improvement in vasculature and overall heart health, how that impacts this long
So,
term
so I think
cognitive
your
risk.
question is like, is does the protective benefits from the endovascular side of things
Mhm.
have more of an effect on dementia? Yeah. And,
Well,
and
the
I guess
running on, yeah, yes, yeah.
and it's confounded by running. Yeah. So to clarify, if you were to look at an older person, like someone over the age of 70 who died of any cause, and we were to look at their brain, it's likely that you're going to find some evidence of amyloid and some evidence of tau somewhere. It's just kind of gunk that we build up over time. So I think in a study they did in Hawaii with like 300 or some odd biopsies, about 90% of people had some evidence of Alzheimer's related proteins in their brain. The question is, does the burden of that protein build up enough to cause a dementia?
Yeah.
And so, um, to clarify, like a dementia is the disability or the inability to like kind of like execute the activities of daily living in your life due to an acquired
Mhm.
cognitive impairment. So, you and I may pick up this amyloid and over time
Mhm.
die of another cause or something else, and it's kind of
Yeah.
like along for the ride.
We die with the
We
common way
die
we say
with
with,
amyloid, not of
not of
amyloid. Yeah,
amyloid.
exactly.
Yeah.
But for us to have an Alzheimer's dementia, the burden has to build up in
Right.
specifically our temporal lobes. Obviously,
Mhm.
there can be different types of Alzheimer's, but that's
Yeah.
most commonly what happens. And you develop this classic amnestic dementia where
Mhm.
you have no registration memory, so you can't store any memories, and then
Yeah.
everything kind of like starts to decompensate from there.
Yes. Yeah.
So with these running studies, I wonder if it's specifically so protective against Alzheimer's
Mhm.
because a lot of that is focused around the temporal lobes. So
Mhm.
we know
Yes.
Alzheimer's
Yeah.
hits the hippocampi first, and
Uh-huh.
running has such a protective benefit on the hippocampi. So
Uh-huh.
I guess my question is like, does it help with other types of dementia, because there's several different types of dementia, it's mostly combined, or is it like Alzheimer's specifically?
Yeah.
Granted, Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia that most people will come across. So I think regardless, we know that like running is a great way to promote longevity for multiple reasons, but I wonder, is it just because we happen to be improving neuroplasticity in this specific region? And the other thing too is this could be beyond my knowledge. Like maybe it promotes neuroplasticity really well in other regions of the brain, and I've just read all the studies about the hippocampus because I'm not an expert on this, and this is just kind of like the area that I've focused in. But it is what I've noticed.
I wonder how you think about, or how we think about, maybe not just the metabolic changes in the way that like metabolic or metabolic syndrome is used commonly in medicine, but like metabolism, like you were talking about earlier, at the level of the brain, in terms of sort of, there was a paper I was reading that was talking about the increase in a number of different things, BDNF one of them, but also like VEGF and an increase in microvasculature in the brain from exercise interventions, particularly kind of these more conditioning aerobic based ones. And the like buildup of amyloid or tau, like how it's impacted. I can't speak to that in a way beyond what the question I sort of just posed. But I know one of the mechanisms is also maybe thought to be the like idea that there's an increase in not just BDNF, but VEGF. And so there's an increase in sort of microvasculature within the brain, which is probably good from like a stroke perspective, but also greater ability to kind of clear waste products from the brain, because when exercising individuals, there's an increased sort of level of blood flow capacity.
Interesting.
From the VEGF increase.
Yeah. So it's funny you should say that. There's a paradoxical effect in other things like smoking, for example. So anything that induces VEGF. So smoking induces VEGF the same way exercise does, because you're in transient hypoxic states. And so that hypoxia induces things like adenosine, which help promote VEGF and other like new vasculature. So basically, your blood vessels don't get the oxygen they want, so they grow new blood vessels to help cover everything better. So the paradox with smoking is that smoking itself increases your risk of a stroke, but because of the new vasculature that you form in your brain, your outcomes of that stroke are better than people that don't smoke.
Fascinating.
Yeah, right? So the neurologists always, like, they kind of, like, when I rotate them, they laugh about that a little bit. They're like, yeah, like, I would never encourage smoking, but then, like, they do better. And the ideal thing to do is exercise, though, because if you're not getting the downside of smoking and you get the extra vasculature, so if you did have a stroke, you'd have like kind of these more satellite or ancillary like capillaries or arterioles or venules to help collect oxygen and remove waste. The same thing actually happens in your heart too. You can grow more connections in your heart from exercise and from smoking. So increases the risk of heart attack, but also maybe you have more collateral blood flow.
Right. Well, I like to take a step back. I feel like this is kind of a meta comment now on just like this podcast in general. I know to our listeners, we're like a little in the weeds right now, but like, I feel like what we're talking about, what you just said of the like, well, here's a consideration that you probably, in your 20 or 30-minute visits with your doctors don't have time to talk about. Just like the really frustrating but beautiful complexity of what it is that we're talking about when we talk about physical and mental health, of like, it's not just this thing is bad and we have one thing that's happening and that's how we talk about it. It's like when you really dive into this stuff and study it, it's this really complicated cascade of multiple things happening all at once, which I think everyone knows to some extent. But I think when you really go into a topic that you're interested in, you find like all of these different iterating factors.
Yeah, and it's wild to me, like with biochem or with exercise physiology, it starts out with exercise is good.
Yeah.
And you go through an insane amount of complex nuance.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this factor, it like induces these growth transcription factors, which activates this tyrosine kinase. And then at the very end, you get to exercise is good.
Yeah.
And you're like, nice.
Nice. You're like, but now I know.
But now I like really know exercise is good.
It was like that paper I sent you where I fell into the weeds about like what, I'm not going to talk about this because I really can't, but the like, is lifting weights and your heart rate going up during like a bench press or something or like a squat, is that the same health-wise, like for heart health and your cardiovascular system, as when your heart rate goes up during like running for 45 minutes. And it got this paper. I was in the weeds. I probably didn't understand the paper that well. We may have a cardiologist on sometime, given the number of like cardiovascular and metabolic risks in the psych population. But it was fascinating. It was the same thing of like, well, technically, if it's responding against the vasculature in this way during lifting because your muscles are squeezing, like it's fascinating. It's really complicated. It's not a good job if you want certainty, I think.
Yeah, and I think anyone who wants certainty shouldn't pursue science, unfortunately.
Yeah, probably
It's
not
just
art either.
Certainty sells. Yeah.
It does sell.
So now that we kind of have like seen or discussed some of the ways that we know exercise is correlated with increased brain health and maybe actually longevity and aging and reducing our risk of dementia, there's this kind of question. Everyone loves to compare exercise modalities. Yeah. So when we come back, we'll take a look at how exercise racks and stacks against other forms.
Racks and stacks.
Yeah. How does it stratify?
Yeah.
When it comes to things like weightlifting. Yeah. Because
this is a crucial question when you're exercising for your health.
Right. Because if I'm not winning, what am I doing?
Then if you're second, you're first loser, as they say.
Okay. So
okay.
When we come back, the exercise hierarchy, the exercise Olympics.
The exercise Olympics.
And we're back. With the exercise Olympics. So
just dancing
Margaret,
through life.
You've been judging or racking and stacking these different modalities.
Have I been?
Well, I've just been eager to see what you've managed to dig up.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we think about with this is that like running is one form of conditioning or cardiovascular exercise. And it is a great one, I think, as both you and I think, but it is not the only one. And I think sometimes, at least currently, it gets more kind of accolades or kind of respect than other forms, as if it's like the ultimate thing to do. And
because it is the ultimate thing to do.
Right. I mean, sure. So that one threw me for a loop for some reason. I don't know why.
Margaret's trying to temper this. She's like, how do I watch my words here? And I'm like, no, running is clearly superior.
Like, next question. No, but this question of like, right, I think actually to go to something basic, like what are the fitness guidelines, like the US fitness guidelines, which are 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity, i.e. like, this is kind of hard. I can't super talk during this, but I can say a couple sentences, or 75 minutes a week minimum for kind of like across the lifespan of adulthood. Of vigorous would be the second one, or a mixture of those two. And while running is one way to get those minutes in, it also is limited to a lot of people. A lot of people do not like it, or don't know how to start running. And so then the question becomes, is running the only thing that's doing this, right? We've talked a little bit about lifting, and we'll leave that for now in terms of like lifting and like resistance exercise can also be good for your mental health in probably different ways. Maybe some overlap in some distinct ways in terms of the neurobiology. But aerobic exercise has maybe particular things in terms of the physiologic processes happening. And so if we want people, which I think we do, for a general health perspective, given the increased risk in the psychiatric population, specifically the SMI or severely mentally ill population around shortened lifespans, especially related to cardiometabolic health, then we have to think about what is the ideal, if there is one, which question mark maybe, but also then what is the most ideal in that it'll help the most people with their health and having a longer life that is more functional for them.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Pete's quote, the best medicine is the one your patient will take.
Yeah, and so that takes me to...
So if skydiving was the greatest form of exercise you could get, like big whoop that we did so many studies on the benefits of skydiving. Like who has access to a parachute in a plane? Right.
Daily cold water plunge, sauna, and skydive protocol.
Yeah, just have keep a cold plunge in your backyard. It's just $4,500.
That's it. I got a bucket.
Oh,
Meanwhile,
and also
running
high
at
altitude.
cross-country.
Created in a high altitude chamber room too.
You
And
have to go.
it turns out having a private chef prepare all of your meals also reduces your cholesterol.
What if we did a study that was like escape room benefit on mental health, and it was like clinical implications, like you must recommend to your patients they go cute 3 times weekly to an escape room, or like some other like mini golf, like
Oh gosh,
mini golf. Honestly, I think that would be awesome. I think mini golf for mental health. We should do a study on that.
You could probably get enough data to make a new syndrome, the DSM, like escape room syndrome or something.
Escape room syndrome, low mini golfism. Just that's a problem in my life.
Yeah.
But so
you're mini golf deficient?
I am mini golf deficient because Boston doesn't have that many that are close enough by. I'm like, what is this? I thought this was a city.
Yeah.
Where's the culture?
That's so funny. Everywhere in the Midwest, I feel like it's just mini golf and go-karts wherever you go.
Bowling, of course. Where's the culture here? Like, are you telling me Paul Revere didn't mini golf?
You guys just have like a bunch of like speakeasies and like pretentious bars.
What? Okay. Yes. But I like those too. So I just I want like to mini golf and then follow it up with a pretentious speakeasy bar,
Gotcha.
you know, and then go LARP the Paul Revere trail or whatever, the Freedom Trail.
Yeah. You want to put a golf ball into a hippopotamus's mouth under a windmill.
Right.
Before you go drink a lager in a basement that's candlelit.
Ideally in the Boston Common, and Mayor Wu, if you're listening to this, what I would have is a mini golf subset part of it. Like there's always, parks and shit for kids. Love that. Great for them. Mini golf. And then you're right across from the Cheers bar. Tell me that wouldn't improve Boston's mental health?
No, it would. So how does mini golf compare to running?
Right.
What does
There's
the data
not been
show?
studies on that. That is a lacking part of the field. But
what have there been studies on?
I'm getting there. There have been a bunch of different studies on different basically aerobic interventions. Running has been one of them. Walking has been one of them. Dancing has been one of them, which we will talk about. Just I think it's an interesting kind of cross comparison. But there's also been, I think I mentioned swimming. There's been like basically if there was a machine or a sport related to it for like aerobic exercise, I think there's been small and sometimes large studies, but running's definitely been very well studied. I would say walking is probably second in terms of like the studies on overall mental health. And then as we talked about earlier, like you can't think about mental health of your patient in front of you without also thinking about their physical like pain level and cardiometabolic health and functional like ability. And so that is another reason why we have to think about like these different modalities. I won't get into all those other ones. I think an interesting one to think about, and that's prevalent in the kind of older population, is swimming or like water aerobics, because they don't have like as much joint like load bearing, and they can be better for pain in some ways. Although I'll leave that to our physical therapy and PM&R colleagues to talk more on. But what the paper I'm referencing is a paper from December 2023 by Jan and Nicholson, which is the effectiveness of dance interventions on psychological cognitive health outcomes compared with other forms of physical activity, a systematic review with meta-analysis. I won't bore you with the details of this, but I wonder if we kind of parse out things about exercise, right? Because there's like what we mentioned earlier, the kind of simple like good, bad for brain or not. But there's these different parts, as you were mentioning, and kind of going into like, why is this good for different types of dementia or this different cognitive capacity? That if we're really thinking about the brain in a robust way, different parts of the brain interact differently with different kind of neurochemical cascades that we might cause with exercise, right? Like how high of a receptor density is on one part of the brain versus another. And so I just say that to say, if we get specific, I don't know that the literature is totally there yet, but like thinking about different parts of exercise that might be active ingredients in someone's overall well-being. Can you think of anything just anecdotally or like that you might hypothesize that dance might be a better form of like aerobic heart, like cardiovascular exercise for someone, for a population or for a certain function compared to like running per se?
So dance incorporates spatial movement and music in a way that running doesn't. And so I know that for a lot of patients, um, even when parts of their memory go, their music is intact. And so being able to connect your musical centers, I don't know what Brodmann area they are, but being able to connect those with your mind muscle connection makes a significant difference. So that's kind of like what I'm thinking is, okay, you're you have to move along to the beat, which is a much more complicated task. And then I think the other part of it too is dancing is often with another person. So you have to like kind of interpret body language and use your mirror neurons, things like that, where you're using your full brain in a way that you may not when you're running, because you can socialize while you're running, but you're not actively playing off of another person.
Right. Right.
So I guess that's what I would guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think the first one I want to start with is just that compared to running interventions or some other like more machine-based or very repetitive forms of aerobic exercise, which I think at this point we have reason to think, again, resistance and lifting also has mental health impacts and benefits, but the most robust for anxiety and depression at present, the most evidence we have is for these aerobic-based exercises. But the first one is just, do people like it? I.e., what is the adherence rate? Yeah, just it's fun.
Dancing is fun. Okay.
Dancing through life is fun. Thank you. Jonathan Bailey, if you want to be on our podcast.
It's Dancing with the Stars, not Running with the Stars. I got you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that might be a show. But so I think that's one thing that they talked about in this study is just like, what is the adherence rate and like how much do people continue to do it? One of the things that I believe they mentioned in this study also is that it doesn't necessarily seem, while there are long-term positive impacts on like epidemiologic studies for exercise, it's not clear how long like depression is better. Like if someone starts with depression and they do like an 8-week intervention of running and they improve during the intervention, if they stop the running, then the intervention it seems to not. If they stop running, then they are going to go back to the depression to some extent. Yeah. And maybe if we did studies, it was like 5 years and you had someone run for 2 years, like would that be a change total? Like, right?
Sure.
I don't think we can say that. I think about like the idea of like studies in exercise science on like muscle change. And it's like if you did a 6-week study versus a year, it's going to be very different. But point of that being is that if the benefit doesn't happen once that you stop the intervention, then we really, really need to care about the ability to do it sustainably long term. And one of the things that will drive that is the intrinsic motivation. That's just, I kind of just like to do this.
Yeah. And I think that like that applies to the ketogenic diet too. Like we see the benefits of the ketogenic diet, but staying keto long term kind of sucks. And like similar to what you're talking about, if you're going to relapse the second you stop keto, how realistic is this as like our long-term solution to something? Because I think what else to say to patients that go keto, they're like, I'm going to do keto for the next 8 months. Like, well, we don't know if keto, like as soon as you stop doing keto, you lose the benefits. So
right.
Like, are you going to do your ketogenic diet the next 50 years?
Right. And what do we lose in your life if...
Yeah, like what are the risk benefits of?
Yeah, and how much does it cost you mentally to do something that you hate? Right,
a breakfast that's just like a block of cheese.
Well, I'm having the pancakes as I said prior with my career. But yeah, how much does it cost you? How much if you like just really do not like running and it's not fun, and even if you're doing it year after year,
it's not a good intervention.
Yeah, like we want to like when we think about quality of life, it's also like if someone's going to spend a portion of their week and time and mind dedicated to this. If we could make it fun and something that's good for them, I think that from a quality of life perspective, that's what we would want, right? Like not just for them to have to kind of like force it out. As my brother once told me, set the bar really high and then do the least amount of work to get over it. So
yeah, definitely.
So that's the first one is just there was an easier retention rate. The second part was what you had mentioned, which is the idea of interacting with folks and it being social, especially with this kind of, you had mentioned kind of the mirrored activity, but in coordination, which is a combination of the social elements as well as this paper actually talked about like positive, like wanted social touch, like just even like a pat on the, like a friendly, like high five that like there is something within human biology of being a co-regulating. I think this is what interpersonal like neurobiology kind of talks about more than I'll be able to right now, but that kind of interaction that is also not antagonistic. Like it's not, I think if you looked at like doing like a tango with someone versus someone like tackling you in football, I don't know that the touch part would be mediated quite the same way.
Well, I think when someone tackles you, they just squeeze the oxytocin out of you.
They say, love you, baby. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that there is that element, right? And like this human contact, when we talk about like the loneliness epidemic, it's not just in connecting, like, here I am walking around in my like meat suit body, and then we're going to have a meeting of the minds. It's also like being around, being the presence of other people and having the kind of interaction with their body language, with you're both interacting with music, and that level of connection is something distinct just from agreeing on an idea, right?
Okay. So dance is unique because it's fun and it has this interpersonal interaction, this wanted human touch that other forms of activity don't have. Yeah. Okay.
When like, to what we talked about earlier at the beginning of the podcast, like you are doing something together. And in most of these settings, unless you're like on Dancing with the Stars or a professional dancer, it's a lot like play. Like you're just doing it for fun. You're not doing it because someone's looking at you and is like scoring you, again, unless you're a professional dancer. Versus in a sport where like you're playing against another team and you're working with someone else, you like can lose. Whereas this is like, we're actually just like building a sort of Lego tower together, and it's just for the hell of it. So I think there's that kind of unique teamedness about it. And then one of the things that they mentioned in this paper is, so there's less studies, there's emerging studies. They don't think it's not effective for those, like there's kind of like a split that they mentioned in this paper, which is at 55 years. And it says, in those 54 years and under, the current literature pool focuses on psychological outcomes, while those for 55 years and over, there's a greater focus on cognitive capacity, which I think we can guess why. Like that's part kind of how our conversation's been flowing too. But it says the effectiveness of dance interventions is most evident in the domains of self-efficacy, anxiety, depression, motivation, and health-related quality of life, especially in older individuals. And then there's minimal in those less than 16, so like kids, but there's emerging evidence that it may lessen the impact of somatization and hostility. So sort of like dysregulation in the body through emotion or physical sensation, that it may have play a part in sort of a, almost maybe they postulate like a mindfulness sort of component to it that allows that sensation and distress regulation to be better.
So does that do that in a way that running can't, I guess is my question. Because this isn't all play. This is a competition, right? Is running better than dancing? Yeah, that's my question.
I think that there are different cognitive things that is superior then. So I guess the one thing I should say is like in this meta-analysis, they talked about a number of studies where it compared it.
So I guess what I'm getting at is I saw a tree diagram that was looking at every different modality of exercise, and it put dance at the top, actually. So they looked at efficacy of depressive symptoms with the intervention over several studies, and the effect size was the greatest with dance. And running was comparable with SSRIs, but dance was above them. And then down at the very bottom was giving the patient information about their disease.
Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right. Yeah.
So I found that interesting. We have one paper that when it tried its hardest to stratify these, dance was the one that came out on top, and I was like very surprised by that.
Yeah, I think we were talking about two separate papers. I think that this paper was like saying not against that, but was saying it's also hard to know, like, this paper is breaking down into different psychological functions, like the ones where dance wins. And that one is kind of saying, like, what was it ranking it on? Was it like a PHQ-9?
Right.
Or was that what it was?
I think it was a PHQ-9, which has its own flaws.
Right. And so this PHQ-9 being, for those who don't know, it's basically depression's the most common depression.
And it's a self-reported subjective screener on how depressed you feel. Yeah.
So, this question of like the results of a paper and what does it mean? Famously, we study we pick our symptoms and then we ask a very concrete question versus if we asked like people after intervention. There was a podcast I was listening to talking about like trying to study psychoanalytic therapy and its outcomes versus studying like in PTSD populations versus studying like outcomes based on a PHQ-9. So all of that to say, I think that there is maybe parts where we could think about maybe how we can spend the last few minutes of this episode is how to help people think about or help their patients think about choosing, in this episode at least, cardiovascular exercise that might be the most, like from our understanding so far, how we talk to our patients about like cardiovascular exercise that'll be the most likely to benefit them as an individual. And I have some thoughts on this, but I'm curious yours. Or if you have more to say on the dance part too.
Yeah, so I don't have anything else to say on dance. I do know I was looking at how does lifting affect BDNF, because I'm stuck on this BDNF rabbit hole. And it turns out there's not a lot of conclusive evidence that BDNF is increased or beta hydroxybutyrate are increased when you're lifting. Some, I think CrossFit studies found people at increased levels of BDNF, but other lifting studies they didn't.
Yeah, and CrossFit's such a cardio metabolic lifting too.
Yeah, so is it the cardio benefit of it? So is it really just sustained endurance activity? But that's not to be said that we still see people feel better clinically when they lift weights, period. And that could just be through another mechanism. And maybe we're siloing ourselves too much when we just look at something like BDNF. I think it's a good mechanism, but it also, the fact that we see people get better with these other modalities should remind us that there are like probably thousands of other like neurotrophic factors that we don't know about and are not measuring that are also being affected. And I think insulin is another important one to think about. And something like lifting actually can increase your insulin sensitivity because you're upregulating your glute receptors on your muscles. And that has a lot of different downstream functions that I can't speak intelligently about. But that's not something that happens at the same rate when you're not inducing muscle hypertrophy.
Right. Well, that's what I was thinking about. And we're going to do a third. Inevitably, we're going to do a third exercise episode since this is our micro interest on maybe lifting and mental health or putting these pieces together. But like, there is such a bidirectional relationship between lifting, like resistance training and cardiovascular training. Like that, if you're someone who is mostly a runner and running helps you, and running is the thing that helps your mental health, like you still probably need to do some additional training with strength so that you don't get injured, so that you don't have to just suddenly stop running and then you lose that benefit to you. And with lifting, I mean, I think there's a fair bit. I think we need to care about for people's longevity. Like we are MDs, so like we do need to care about their overall health. Again, given that our population struggles with their like cardiometabolic and like full body well-being. But the other side of it being like, if you lift a lot, besides you should care about your heart, it's also that like doing cardiovascular exercise can improve your ability to like maintain to have less fatigue during like your lifting session. So I just say that as like I think there's a reason the guidelines for fitness like recommend both of these things. But I think also from experience, I mean, not even just my patients, but with like friends or other people, like talking about the fitness minimum guidelines, because that's what they are. They feel overwhelmed and they feel like, I hate all of this. I don't know where to start.
And so kind of back to how you talk about it with your patients, I think that the most salient thing you pointed out about dance was that it was fun. And that's actually probably the most important factor I include with my patients is, we can split hairs over the effect size on the PHQ-9 difference of like a half standard deviation difference on this like one tree line diagram or something. But the reality is, if you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it as much. The person that likes walking is going to walk farther than the person who likes the destination, I guess, to quote Sam Solik. So I just try to find the activities they like. So for example, I had one patient who, it was like a similar scenario, and I was like trying to talk about run clubs or maybe soccer or something. And then I just asked them what they would do if they had time off. They said hiking. I was like, let's hike. Like, let's make hiking our goal, because it's not helpful to tell someone, like shove someone all the information about how BDNF is going to like increase neuroplasticity in the hippocampus if they just hate running. But if they like hiking and they do it, it's going to be like a very similar effect, and it's something that they can do long term. So I think that when we get into the weeds, we can look at things like the ketogenic diet and all these different activities, but then forget how well we can adapt it into our lives. So that's for me, it's really just, what do you like? It has to be something, but like, what do you like?
Yeah.
And how do we try something new?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think I often start with the same place of just like, I actually will often start in all my patients, but I think I started doing this in the eating disorder patients when we were starting to talk about like what movement and exercise might look like for them in the future, especially if they had chronic pain and their pain's worsened when they can't exercise. It's also worsened by not getting enough nutrition. But asking like, what did you like to do when you were like 6? Like, did you play outside trying to catch fireflies? Did you like kicking a ball around with your siblings? Did you like, dancing with your mom in the car? What did you just like before there was any rules that you were aware of how you had to move your body? And then how can we start there with something you like and add active elements that are the least painful for you? Like, if you like a group fitness setting, okay, great. Well, and you like dance, let's have you go to a Zumba class. Let's have you go to this. If you don't like that, maybe more individual at home, And then like, how do we find kind of like, I think it often sounds for me like the conversation I have around exposures and like exposure and response prevention, where it's like, what seems like it would be for the next couple weeks before I see you again, like 3% harder than where you're at right now, but only 3%. So it feels like, oh yeah, I can definitely do that. And then go from there and like maybe still build up to like a quote unquote optimal longevity / like meeting the guidelines for their mental health, because I think a lot of these studies are like a certain amount of dose, right? That the dose does matter probably for impact. But similar to that, we don't start like Zoloft at 200 for someone with OCD. We're like, well, we're going to start at 25 or 50 and see.
Yeah. And I think the important thing there is dose and it being specific. So like one thing that a pitfall I ran into early in residency was I'd be like, what do you do for exercise? And they're like, oh, nothing, but I want to walk more. Okay, walk more. That's a good goal. Well, I don't say try Zoloft. And they're like, what dose? They're like, more than you have before.
What?
Like, you know what I mean? Like we want a specific, like we're going to start at 25 minutes to 50. So now when I talk about it with patients, if they are motivated to do it, I say like, let's try 2 20-minute walks this week.
Yeah.
And just, I try to give them like a very specific number because that kind of gives them a dose. It also gives them something to work towards, because when you wake up in the morning and say like, I have to knock out a single 20-minute walk today, you can plan that instead of just, oh, I want to walk more.
Right.
And that vague objective and turns into nothing, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Or a lot of the times it does.
Yeah. Well, and I think also recognizing the adaptability and helping people plan for that. Like, this is going to feel tough and we want to choose the right amount of tough, but like, this will change over time if we keep doing it and want to do it. And kind of, again, this is very similar to how I talk about exposures, that it's like, there's going to be part of you that maybe thinks like, oh, it's so hard for me to even do this small exposure. If someone has like agoraphobia and they like, their challenge that week is to like step on the sidewalk. And kind of helping them frame like, this is where we're starting. And this same ability to push yourself to the next 2% harder beyond your comfort zone, this process will be the thing that gets you to where you want to go. But yeah, right now it won't look like that. It will look really slow.
Yeah. And what I found even for myself is that my discomfort tolerance improves like a muscle.
Yeah.
And also, there's less discomfort the more you do it. Like, you don't even have to tolerate as much discomfort. Like, I've been training for about 3 weeks now, like consistently running. And the first week sucked. Oh my God. Like, I was dogging it. I was running slow. My heart rate was like,
you did not yet have that dog in you. You were just dogging.
No, it was awful. And then today I ran 6 miles, and the 6 miles I ran felt easier than the 2 I ran 3 weeks ago. And so 3 weeks ago, I had to tolerate more discomfort for those 2 miles than the amount of discomfort I had to tolerate for these 6 miles. So it's almost like I also kind of try to say like, hey, you're going to have to tolerate this discomfort. But then once you kind of get through this 2-week period, it just gets easier. And like, it's not only you getting tougher, it also is just easier after that.
I think helping people, if I was your therapist, the way I might help you would also be like noticing patients who are hard on themselves or like might be perfectionistic, or this is not necessarily all you, but like getting a sense before we ever talk about exercise, like how someone is with themselves, and then grading how I talk to them based on their likelihood that I think they're going to like come over pressure or put in their mind that I'm going to like judge them really harshly if they don't do some like really intense routine. And I'll actually actively get ahead of it by saying like, and I'm gonna be mad at you if instead of walking for three times a week for 20 minutes, you ran, 4 miles when you've never run a day in your life, or 5 times we talked about how you wanted to change this. Cause like, I think that you can be kind of not nice to yourself, and your body and your mind needs time to adapt to this. And I think also the idea that like, 80% or something of like of workouts in the cardiovascular domain at least should be like zone 2.
Well, and I think it's helpful to use that metaphor, that lens, to frame exercise as a medication, because rather than a punishment, and here's the minimum amount of punishment that I'm prescribing you, and they're like, oh, I'm going to punish myself more, therefore I'll run even further. It's like, well, if you viewed medication as a punishment, I'm like, here, take 20 of this pill. No, I'm going to take 100 because I deserve more punishment. I'm like, well, no, I don't want you to take 100. We'll work up to 100, but right now your dose is 20.
Right.
So
how long till I know if it's working, doc? 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 3 months.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of like that. It says like, hey, this exercise is really your prescription. It's not you beating yourself into the ground. So like, don't go over it. Don't try to go under it. Like, just try to hit it right on the mark.
Yeah.
And that's actually something I had to learn in college when I was running. Like, we had this idea, like, if I just run more, then I'll be more deserving, then I'll show more grit. But taking the easy days easy and the hard days hard is like the best thing you can do.
Just a life lesson at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really.
I love our exercise episodes so much because I'm fascinated.
Yeah. So I'm really curious as to how like all these other like niche exercises, things like Pilates or yoga or meditation, compare when they're folded into that. So I think it could be kind of cool to incorporate that aspect of things as well. And then one thing I've been stuck on recently is sleep. So I kind of want to come back to.
We need to do a sleep
episode. Yeah.
We need to do one of. We're probably not. But knowing you and I, we're probably going to need to do like 8 sleep episodes. So it'll be like, well, we got into dreams during this part of your sleep cycle.
Yeah. So I have a Garmin now. See, look at when I have a Garmin.
Boom.
It tracks my sleep cycle and gives me a little score, which is not, I don't know if it's the greatest thing to be like obsessing over my sleep, but it's also kind of like biofeedback, which is helpful. So I've now just been like thinking a lot more about how like my performance on like a run or something correlates with my sleep at night and my sleep stages are. And fortunately, it tells me how terrible my sleep is when I have a 24-hour shift. And it's like your sleep score is like 15 out of 100. You heathen. Why did you do that?
Why did you do that? You're never going to recover. No, you will. Yeah, no, I think all of these parts, I think the lifestyle parts of mental health are important. And often people come and see us, and this makes a lot of sense given the current medical model in the US. We have 20 minutes to see them. We have a lot of questions we have to ask and answer, but it often leaves us with not a lot of time to talk about these things. Like, it leaves us with maybe 2 minutes if you're efficient and lucky, but not these more in-depth things about these parts that can have like the same effect size on your mental health, like depression or anxiety, as an SSRI I'm prescribing, but we don't often get to dedicate time to it.
Exactly. And I think like as psychiatrists, our organ is the mind, and it's our responsibility to look at every medication or medical intervention that affects the mind. Like like how a cardiologist will spend a lot of time talking about exercise before they jump on a statin, I think we should do that too before we talk about SSRIs, because if the patient before us was exercising consistently, that could be almost as strong as their SSRI or stronger, depending on like how they respond to it. So like they're both powerful treatments that we should be considering.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to wrap up for today, and it's got me excited.
You gotta run off.
Yeah. I don't want to run on. Have too many run-on sentences.
You don't want to keep running your mouth.
I have been running my mouth. I think I'm just gonna run out of ideas if we try to keep talking.
Yeah, I've run out of ideas for responding to that.
So, but I am excited about like kind of these new episodes that we can look into in the future. So, if you're in the room with us, the listener, I'm talking to you. Hi, listener.
Like, who's he talking to?
Thank you so much for being here and joining us on this exercise podcast. How do you like it when we talk about exercise? Because I know I like talking about exercise. Margaret loves talking about exercise. Do you like listening to us talk about exercise? And are there specific things within exercise you'd rather have us cover? I know we can get into the weeds. We can get more into the weeds, or we can get less into the weeds.
Get out of the weeds.
Yeah. Do you want us to go on the lawn or on the concrete or something else? Anyways, if you have any ideas like that, please come chat with us and let us know. We're on IG and TikTok at Human Content Pods, or you can contact the team directly at howtobepatientpod.com. Shout out to all the listeners leaving the kind and thoughtful feedback, and shout out to all the listeners leaving other kinds of feedback too. I'm in a good mood, so honestly, all you guys are great. You're interacting.
You're like, I love the world.
Yeah, I ran earlier today, and like all interaction is good interaction.
I'm doing a dance workout after this, so
perfect.
I'm prepared. Well, I'm in bad mood, so haters. Just kidding.
Okay. Boo to anyone who criticized Margaret for Ego's Fragile.
It's good. It's good exposure therapy, you know.
If you want to see the full episode on YouTube, you can go check out my channel at It's Brezro. We'll be posting all these as well as shorts and stuff from the pod as well. Thanks again for listening. We're your hosts, Preston Roche and Margaret Duncan. Our executive producers are Preston Roche, me, Will Flannery, Margaret Duncan, Kristen Flannery, Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brooke. Our editor and engineer is Jason Portizo. To learn more about our program disclaimer and ethics policy, submission verification and licensing terms, and our HIPAA release terms, go to our website, howtobepatientpod.com, or reach out to us at howtobepatient@human-content.com with any questions or concerns. How to Be Patient is a human content production. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more of us, or if you want to see, this is Lilac, she's my cat. She's going to be waving her hand at one of the floating boxes, which will lead to more episodes. Lilac, point to the other episodes. Lilac doesn't know what the internet is, but I swear they're there. They probably exist for real. But in the meantime, I'm just going to pet Lilac, and then I'm going to go dance in the background.